Welcome to Romance Tales by Mandy. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Now, sit back, relax, and let's begin.
My world was falling apart. I could still hear my mother's voice from earlier that morning, cracked with worry, telling me we were out of time. My father's medical bills had drained everything we had. The house, the only home I had ever known, was weeks away from being taken. And my little sister, barely 18, had no idea how close we were to losing everything. I had tried. God, I had tried. Working double shifts as a paralegal at a high-end law firm in Manhattan, hoping the extra hours would be enough. But it wasn't. Not even close. The truth was brutal and inescapable: we needed money. Fast. That's when he appeared. Gabriel Sinclair. I had seen his name in the papers. A man who built an empire before turning 30, ruthless in business, untouchable in power. Sinclair Enterprises was everywhere: finance, tech, real estate. If it made money, he owned a piece of it. But none of that prepared me for the sheer force of him in person. Tall, commanding, a presence that made the air feel thinner the second he walked into the dimly lit restaurant where we were supposed to meet. His dark suit molded to his broad shoulders, every inch of him exuding control. And those eyes, gray like a brewing storm, locked onto me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I had no idea why he wanted to see me. Until he spoke.
I need a wife.
I choked on my wine. A wife? He leaned back in his chair, completely unfazed.
It's simple. I need to finalize a merger that requires a stable personal life. You need money. I think we can help each other.
He tilted his glass, studying me over the rim. My stomach twisted. A marriage arrangement? This was insane. This was something out of a movie, one of those stories where the naive girl makes a deal with the devil and loses everything. Except I had nothing left to lose. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper.
1 year.
His lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. More like a silent dare.
You'll live in my house, attend social events, play the role. In exchange, I'll take care of your family's financial troubles. Every last one.
My heart pounded. 1 year. I should have said no, should have walked away. But when I looked at him, at the sharp cut of his jaw, the cold precision in his gaze, I felt something dangerously close to intrigue. This man didn't feel things, didn't get attached. That should have made him safe. So why did my body react to him like a live wire exposed to an open flame? I reached for my wine glass, trying to steady my hand. No feelings.
None.
No expectations.
Just one.
He leaned in, voice low and smooth.
When we're in public, I expect you to act like you want me.
A slow heat curled in my stomach. The way he said it, like he already knew that wouldn't be a problem. This was dangerous, stupid, reckless. But when he extended his hand across the table, waiting for my answer, I didn't hesitate. I slid my fingers into his, the heat of his palm engulfing mine. Deal.
Love was a liability. I had learned that lesson a long time ago. It was messy, unpredictable, an emotion designed to make men weak. And weakness had no place in my world. That's why marriage had never been in my plans. But business came first, and my board made it clear. The merger with Blackwood Holdings would only move forward if I presented a more stable image. Investors wanted a man they could trust, someone grounded, a devoted husband, not a ruthless CEO with a rotating door of meaningless affairs. So, I needed a wife, and I needed her fast. I could have picked anyone. A polished socialite, the daughter of a business associate. Someone who understood the game, who would smile for the cameras and keep her mouth shut. But then I found Katherine Hayes. Her name came up in a casual conversation. One of my legal advisors mentioned her in passing, paralegal drowning in debt, struggling to keep her family from falling apart. I looked into her. I did my research, and the more I uncovered, the more I knew she was the one. She had no power, no connections, no hidden agenda, just desperation wrapped in a deceptively pretty package. Perfect. The first time I saw her in person, she didn't even realize I was watching. She was seated in a cafe, papers spread across the table, chewing on the end of a pen as she frowned at whatever document was in front of her. She was gorgeous in a way that wasn't calculated. Long, dark hair spilling over her shoulders, a deep blue blouse clinging to soft curve she probably didn't even think twice about. But it was her mouth that caught my attention. Plush lips she kept pressing together in concentration, like she was trying to bite back frustration. I'd seen her bank statements, the unpaid medical bills, the foreclosure notice on her family home. She was out of time, which meant she wouldn't say no. I arranged the meeting for the next night, chose a restaurant private enough to ensure we wouldn't be interrupted, but intimate enough to make her uncomfortable, to see how she handled the pressure. She walked in hesitantly, but she didn't cower. Her shoulders were straight, her chin lifted. When I told her what I wanted, she didn't gasp or laugh in disbelief. She absorbed it, calculated it. And when she asked how long, in that breathy, cautious voice, I knew I had her. What I didn't expect was the heat that simmered beneath her hesitation. Katherine Hayes wasn't the cold, businesslike choice I should have made. She was fire, unrefined, unpredictable, a problem. And yet, when she reached across the table and slipped her hand into mine, sealing the deal, I didn't pull away. For the first time in a long time, I wondered if I had made a mistake.
My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I curled my fingers around the bouquet, desperate to still them, but even the soft petals felt fragile beneath my grip. My dress, an intricate, breathtaking piece of silk and lace that I hadn't chosen, hugged my body perfectly, molding to curves I never paid much attention to. It was beautiful. I was beautiful. And yet, I had never felt less like a bride. The grand ballroom of the Sinclair estate was something out of a dream. Crystal chandeliers bathed the space in a golden glow, the air filled with the scent of fresh white roses. A string quartet played softly in the background, the delicate notes almost drowned out by the low hum of whispers from the carefully selected guests. I recognized no one. I wasn't supposed to, this wasn't my wedding, not really. It was a transaction, dressed up in a six-figure gown and a diamond ring the size of my sins. Then there was him. Gabriel stood at the altar, tall and imposing in a black tuxedo, every inch of him sculpted from arrogance and power. He was the kind of man who made the world bend around him, like the sheer force of his presence could rearrange gravity itself. But he wasn't smiling. He had been polite all morning, controlled. When he slid the ring onto my finger, his touch was steady, his voice even. He did everything right. And yet, I could feel it, the distance, the cold edge to his words. This was nothing to him. So why did my heart clench when he finally lifted his gaze to mine? I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the way his gray eyes studied me, slow and deliberate. My stomach twisted, heat crawling up my spine, and I hated that my body reacted to him so easily. He was my husband now. The thought made my pulse stutter. It wasn't real. It wasn't real. Then why did I shiver when his fingers brushed mine as he pulled me in for the obligatory kiss? He was careful, too careful. His lips barely pressed against mine, a fleeting touch meant for the cameras. But for a split second, I caught something else, something darker. His fingers flexed against my waist, and his breath fanned against my lips, just enough for me to feel it. And just like that, it was over. The applause was polite, the murmurs approving.
Mrs. Sinclair.
He murmured against my temple, his voice smooth, unreadable. A shiver ran through me. I wasn't sure if it was fear. Or something much, much worse.
She wasn't supposed to look at me like that. The ballroom was a sea of polished elegance. Men in tailored suits, women draped in designer gowns, champagne flutes glistening under the soft chandelier light. Conversations hummed around us, effortless and practiced, alliances and rivalries disguised beneath polite smiles. But Katherine, she wasn't playing along. She stood beside me, her posture deceptively relaxed, that stunning white gown clinging to her in ways that tested my patience. And yet, it wasn't the dress that had my fingers curling into a fist at my side. It was her eyes, sharp, unwavering. Every other woman in this room had spent years perfecting the art of pleasing powerful men. They simpered, they agreed, they followed the unspoken rules. But Katherine, she challenged. Not with words. She had been perfectly polite all evening. No, it was in the way she carried herself. The way she held my gaze, unflinching, even when she knew exactly what kind of man she had just married. She should have been afraid of me. Most people were. Instead, she leaned in, her voice silky and quiet as she murmured,
"You really don't like parties, do you?"
I didn't flinch, didn't let my expression shift. What gave it away? She took a slow sip of her champagne, the corner of her mouth twitching.
The scowl. The way your jaw keeps tightening every time someone approaches. Or maybe the fact that you look 2 seconds away from throwing your glass at the next person who calls you lucky.
My lips pressed into a thin line. She was observant, too observant. I don't like wasting time, I said simply. Her lashes flickered, as if she'd expected that answer.
And this is a waste of time?
I glanced at the crowd, at the shallow conversations dripping in hidden motives. Most of it is. She studied me for a long moment, then surprised me by leaning in closer, her breath warm against my neck.
Well, that's unfortunate, because everyone here is watching us. And if you keep looking like you'd rather be anywhere else, they're going to think there's trouble in paradise.
My fingers tensed around my glass. And you care what they think. A soft laugh.
I care about keeping up the illusion. Isn't that what you wanted?
I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch the subtle challenge in her expression. She was good, too good, and for the first time that night, I had the distinct feeling that I had underestimated her.
The party had lasted too long. I had smiled until my cheeks ached, played my part in the carefully crafted illusion of a happy bride, and let Gabriel lead me through a sea of people who didn't care about me beyond my new last name. Now, the act was over. And I was alone with him. The mansion was nothing like the ballroom, no golden chandeliers, no suffocating perfume or empty conversations. Just silence. Endless, suffocating silence. Gabriel walked ahead of me, his long strides effortless, his presence commanding even in the quiet of his own home. He didn't have to look back to know I was following. The entire night, I had watched him in his element. Calculated. Polite when necessary, ruthless when required. A man who played the game better than anyone. But here, away from the flashing cameras and the watching eyes, there was something else in the way he carried himself. A tension in his shoulders, a sharpness in his movements. And when he finally stopped in front of a set of double doors, my pulse stuttered. The bedroom. The realization sent a heat crawling up my spine. This was always the plan, wasn't it? We were supposed to share a room, supposed to play the devoted newlyweds. But I hadn't thought about what that would actually mean. How it would feel to be in such close proximity to him. Gabriel pushed the doors open, stepping inside first. His suit jacket was already gone, sleeves rolled up, exposing forearms that were all sharp lines and lean muscle. He didn't look back as he spoke.
This is where we keep up appearances. The staff will talk. The world will watch. We need to be convincing.
I swallowed hard, stepping inside. The room was vast, elegant, wrapped in deep shades of navy and charcoal. A fireplace flickered in the corner, casting a soft glow over the king-sized bed that dominated the space. One bed. I turned to him. And what if I don't want to be convincing? His gray eyes met mine, unreadable.
Then you shouldn't have said yes.
The air between us thickened, something dark and heavy settling between us. I should have turned away, should have reminded myself that this was business, nothing more. But my body betrayed me. My breath came too fast, my skin too warm. He exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his hair, his control slipping just enough for me to see it. The tension wasn't just mine. Gabriel Sinclair was a man who didn't lose control. Ever. And yet, as he took a slow step closer, something flickered in his gaze, something dangerous. I had walked into this marriage thinking I knew the rules. But in this moment, standing in his room, with the weight of his stare burning into me, I wasn't so sure anymore.
I barely slept. Catherine's presence had settled into my home like an unwanted storm, disturbing the quiet control I kept over my life. I had expected complications. Nothing about this arrangement was simple, but what I hadn't expected was her. How damn aware I would be of her. The moment we entered the bedroom last night, she hesitated. I saw it in the way she clenched her fingers into the fabric of her dress, in the flicker of uncertainty that crossed her face before she masked it. She didn't trust me. Good. I wasn't a man to be trusted. I had given her space, stripping off my tie and stepping into the bathroom without a word. By the time I returned, the lights were off and she was already curled beneath the blankets, her body stiff, her back turned to my side of the bed. I lay down beside her, keeping as much distance as possible. I told myself it didn't matter, that the scent of her shampoo, something soft, almost floral, didn't distract me, that the slow, steady rhythm of her breath didn't keep me on edge, that the warmth of her body, so close yet untouchable, didn't test my patience in ways I refused to acknowledge. Lying to myself had never been my strong suit. By morning, my mood was razor sharp, my tolerance thin. And then she walked into the kitchen, barefoot, hair messy, a silk robe barely covering her thighs. I stilled, my grip tightened around the coffee mug in my hands, my entire body tensing as she moved across the room, completely unaware of the war she had just started inside me.
Morning.
She murmured, her voice still husky from sleep. I didn't answer, because I was too busy memorizing. The way the robe's thin belt was loosely tied, revealing just enough skin to drive a man insane. The way her collarbone peeked through the delicate fabric. The curve of her hips, the hint of lace beneath the silk. Fuck. I tore my gaze away, focusing on the coffee instead. Restraint. I had mastered it, built my life on it. But this woman was going to be a problem. She poured herself a cup, moving around my kitchen like she belonged there. Like she had always been here. She took a sip, then lifted a brow.
Are you always this pleasant in the morning?
I set my mug down with more force than necessary. Are you always this? Underdressed? Her lips curled.
Is that a problem?
It was a challenge. And the worst part? I wanted to accept it.
The tension had been building for days. I could feel it in every glance Gabriel gave me, sharp, assessing, like he was constantly battling something inside himself. I could feel it in the way he moved, always careful, always in control. But control had limits, and I was starting to see the cracks. It started with something small, an accident. I wasn't expecting to run into him. Literally. I had just stepped out of the bathroom, steam curling in the air behind me, my skin still damp from the hot water. A towel was wrapped tightly around my body, barely secured, my wet hair sticking to my shoulders. And then, bam! A hard, warm, very male body collided with mine. I gasped, gripping the towel with one hand as the other landed on the firm plane of his chest. Bare chest. Oh God. Gabriel's hands instinctively went to my waist, steadying me. The heat of his touch seared through me, sending a jolt of awareness straight down my spine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Water dripped from my hair onto his skin, trailing down the ridges of his abs. His grip tightened, just a fraction, and I felt his breath, hot, uneven, against my cheek. And that's when I realized he was just as undressed as I was. A towel hung low around his waist, barely secured at his hips. I made the mistake of looking down, big mistake. Every inch of him was sculpted, carved in a way that should have been illegal. His chest, his arms, the deep grooves that disappeared beneath the towel. Jesus. I swallowed hard, dragging my gaze back up. His eyes were already on me. Dark, intense, controlled, but barely. "Excuse me," I murmured, trying to step back, but he didn't move. Didn't let go. A muscle in his jaw ticked, his fingers flexing slightly against my waist. For a second, just a second, I thought he was going to say something. But then, just as quickly as it happened, he let go. Stepped back. The moment shattered.
Be more careful next time,
He said, his voice rough, controlled. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, breathless and shaken, my skin still burning where he had touched me. And the worst part? I wasn't sure I wanted the fire to fade. That night, the boundaries cracked a little more. I had been sitting in the library, curled up with a book, when I heard him enter. His presence was impossible to ignore, commanding, consuming. He walked past me, grabbing a glass of whiskey from the bar. The ice clinked against the glass, the only sound in the heavy silence. I should have gone back to my book. I should have ignored the way his shirt sleeves were rolled up, the way the dim light cast shadows over the sharp lines of his face. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "You can sit, you know." He hesitated. Then, after a long moment, he moved to the chair across from me, sinking into it with effortless grace. Another line blurred. I could feel his gaze on me as I pretended to read, my pulse racing with every second that passed. And when I finally looked up, when I met his eyes, I knew. This wasn't just tension anymore, this was something dangerous. Something inevitable. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it.
Control. It was the foundation of everything I built. My company, my reputation, my life. I didn't make impulsive decisions. I didn't let emotions dictate my actions. And I sure as hell didn't let a woman get under my skin. But Katherine, she was a problem, and I was starting to lose control. It started the moment I saw her that morning. She walked into the dining room, hair in soft waves over her shoulders, wearing a dress that clung to her in all the right places. She wasn't even trying, just effortlessly beautiful in a way that made my pulse slow and my thoughts turn reckless. And then she smiled. A simple, innocent curve of her lips, but I felt it everywhere. I forced myself to look away, gripping the coffee cup like it was my anchor. I focused on my schedule, the reports waiting in my office, anything but the woman who was sitting across from me. It didn't work, because all I could think about was the towel. It had been days since it happened, but my mind kept replaying it over and over. Her damp skin, the way her hair clung to her shoulders, the heat of her body against mine, the way her breath hitched when she realized just how little space existed between us. I had been so close to touching her, really touching her, and for one insane second, I had wanted to, but I didn't, because I was not that kind of man. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't weak. And Katherine Hayes, now Sinclair, my wife by contract, my problem by design, was not going to change that.
"You seem tense,"
she said now, pulling me back to the present. Her voice was light, teasing. I looked up. She was stirring her coffee, watching me with those wide, knowing eyes. My grip on the cup tightened. "I have a company to run," I said flatly.
"Right. A company, not a war zone."
I didn't answer, because if I did, I might have said something I shouldn't, like how the real war was happening inside me, and I was starting to think I might lose.
I knew better. I knew better. But when it came to Gabriel Sinclair, logic had stopped working a long time ago. It had been building for weeks. The tension, the stolen glances, the way his eyes would linger on my lips when he thought I wasn't looking. And tonight? Tonight, it finally broke. The storm outside was relentless, rain hammering against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the mansion. The power had flickered once, then gone out completely, drenching the room in darkness except for the occasional flash of lightning. I had been in the library, curled up on the velvet chaise, pretending to read while my thoughts circled back to him. Always him. Then the door opened, and there he was. Gabriel stood in the doorway, his presence swallowing the space hole. A loosened tie, shirt unbuttoned at the collar. That intense, unreadable gaze locked on me like I was the only thing that existed in the world. I should have said something. But I couldn't, because something was different tonight. His walls weren't just cracked, they were shattered. I could see it in the way his chest rose and fell too quickly. In the tension gripping his jaw. In the way he stepped toward me, slow and deliberate, as if he had finally stopped fighting it. And God help me, so had I. I stood as he reached me. Neither of us spoke. The silence between us crackled, electric, charged with something neither of us could contain anymore. His hand came up, fingers skimming along my jaw. His touch was feather-light, almost hesitant, as if giving us this, was the most dangerous thing he had ever done. I didn't move away, I should have. But instead, I tilted my head, silently daring him to take what we both wanted. His eyes darkened, and then his mouth was on mine. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was fire, hunger, a battle neither of us had any intention of winning. His hands were in my hair, tilting my head back as his lips devoured mine. I pressed against him, my fingers gripping the crisp fabric of his shirt, desperate to pull him closer, to feel him, to drown in him. A low growl rumbled from his chest, and suddenly, my back was against the bookcase. His body pressed into mine, his warmth, his strength caging me in. I gasped against his lips, and he seized the opportunity, deepening the kiss until my knees threatened to give out. There was nothing cold about Gabriel Sinclair now. He was heat, raw, consuming, unstoppable. Then, just as suddenly as it started, he pulled away. His breathing was ragged, his forehead resting against mine. His hands still held me, but I could feel the war waging inside him. The push and pull of a man who had just crossed a line he swore he never would.
I shouldn't have done that.
He muttered, voice rough, wrecked. I swallowed hard, my fingers still curled around his shirt. But you did. His jaw clenched. Lightning flashed, illuminating the sharp edges of his face, the conflict in his eyes. And then, without another word, he was gone. Leaving me breathless, shaken, and desperately wanting more.
I had made a mistake. A catastrophic mistake. Kissing Katherine had been reckless. A moment of weakness. And now it was all I could think about. The taste of her was still on my lips. The heat of her body still burned against my skin. Even now, sitting in my office, with numbers and contracts spread out in front of me, she was there, haunting me, taunting me, making me want things I had no business wanting. I ran a hand through my hair, frustrated. I had built my life around control, around logic, around never letting emotions interfere. And yet, one kiss, one moment of surrender, and suddenly, she was under my skin. The sharp buzz of my intercom snapped me back to reality.
Sir, your wife is here.
My assistant announced. Wife. The word sent a bolt of something through me. Something dangerous. I exhaled slowly, sent her in. The door opened, and then there she was. Katherine. Fresh. Effortless. Completely unaware of the power she wielded over me. She stepped inside with that subtle grace of hers, her green eyes sharp, knowing, too knowing. The soft scent of her perfume reached me, and my fingers curled into fists beneath my desk. She tilted her head, studying me.
You're avoiding me.
I arched a brow. I've been working. She let out a quiet, amused breath.
Right.
She didn't believe me, because it was a lie. I had been avoiding her, because if I got too close again, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stop myself. She moved toward my desk, her hips swaying in a way that made my pulse spike. She leaned in, palms resting on the smooth surface, bringing us too close. The tension crackled instantly. That same tension I had been trying and failing to ignore since that night in the library. Her gaze flicked my mouth. A challenge. A dare. I exhaled slowly, my restraint hanging by a thread. Katherine. My voice was low, warning. She only smiled, and I knew, in that moment, that I was playing a dangerous game, and I was losing.
I should walk away. I should step back. I should not be leaning into him like this, my breath uneven, my body betraying every ounce of logic I had left. But then Gabriel's fingers brushed my waist. And all logic evaporated. It started as a slow, torturous game. His hands, strong and sure, skimmed the curve of my hips, pulling me toward him with the kind of restrained intensity that sent a shiver down my spine.
I warned you.
He murmured, his voice rough, dark, brimming with something primal. My pulse pounded. He was talking about our game. The one neither of us seemed to want to stop playing. His lips hovered over mine, so close I could feel the heat of his breath, but not close enough to satisfy the ache growing inside me. His control was maddening, intoxicating, and I snapped first. I fisted his shirt and pulled him in. The moment our lips met, the tension that had been simmering between us for weeks exploded. Gabriel didn't just kiss me. He claimed me. His hands tightened on my hips, fingers digging in possessively as he devoured my mouth, deepening the kiss with a hunger that stole my breath. A low, guttural sound rumbled in his chest when I tangled my fingers in his hair, tugging just hard enough to make him growl against my lips. Then suddenly, he lifted me. Effortlessly. My legs wrapped around his waist, and I barely had time to gasp before he set me down onto his desk, the cool wood pressing against the backs of my thighs. I should have felt exposed. But all I felt was him. His body was between my legs, heat radiating from him, his hands sliding up, pushing my dress higher and higher, until his fingers grazed bare skin. I trembled at his touch.
Tell me to stop.
He rasped, his forehead pressing against mine, his breathing just as unsteady as my own. I should. I could. But when his lips found my neck, when he traced a path of fire down to my collarbone, when his fingers slipped under the lace of my underwear, the sharp ring of his phone sliced through the moment like a blade. We both froze. A beat. Then another. His forehead still rested against mine, his grip on me still firm, but his entire body was wound tight, vibrating with unspent tension. The phone kept ringing. Gabriel exhaled sharply, muttering a curse under his breath before finally pulling back, his jaw clenching as he reached for his phone. His gaze met mine, still dark, still burning.
I have a meeting.
He said, voice rough, raw. It took me a moment to process his words. A meeting. Because of course, this was business. This was temporary. This was never supposed to happen. My body still ached for him, still burned with the memory of his hands, his mouth. But the moment was gone. And as he straightened his tie, forcing himself back into the role of the powerful, untouchable Gabriel Sinclair, I realized something dangerous. I wasn't sure if I wanted that moment back. Or if I wanted more.
I was supposed to be focusing. The boardroom was silent except for the low murmur of voices discussing projections, market strategies, numbers that once held my undivided attention. But all I could think about was her. Katherine, still in my office, still on my desk. The way she looked at me, the way she felt under my hands, soft, warm, willing. I shifted in my chair, exhaling slowly, trying to push the memory away. But it wasn't just about the last few minutes. It was everything. She was a deal, a contract, a necessary move in a calculated game. That was supposed to be the only thing she was. And yet, she'd become a complication, a distraction, a fire I couldn't seem to put out. I adjusted my tie, clenching my jaw as I forced my attention back to the conversation. But the words barely registered, because no matter how much I tried to bury the truth, Katherine was already more than a name on a piece of paper, more than a signature binding us together in a cold, strategic marriage. She had invaded my home, my mind, my control, and I had let her. I had to get it together. I had to stop this before it went too far. But the problem was, when it came to her, it already had. I tapped my fingers against the sleek mahogany table, barely aware of the numbers flashing across the presentation screen. The words coming from my CFO's mouth were just noise. I was supposed to be making decisions, running a billion-dollar empire, not thinking about how Katherine's breath had hitched when I pushed her against my desk, not thinking about how her fingers had curled into my shirt, not thinking about how, if my phone hadn't rung, I would have taken her right there. Damn it. I shifted in my chair, fighting the urge to loosen my tie. Across the table, Ethan, my head of finance, cleared his throat.
Sir?
I blinked, dragging my mind back to the present. What?
You haven't given an opinion on the new acquisition strategy.
Right? Business. The reason I was here. The reason I had married Katherine in the first place. For control. For power. Not for the way she looked at me when I touched her. Not for the way she felt mine, even though she wasn't supposed to be. Proceed with the offer, I said flatly, forcing steel into my tone. Make sure we're positioned as the majority stakeholder before the board votes. Ethan nodded, satisfied. The meeting continued, but my focus was shot. I should have been irritated with myself. Should have been angry at my own lack of control. But I wasn't, because right now, she was in my office. Alone, still breathless, still probably thinking about what almost happened. I clenched my jaw, forcing my mind back to the meeting. I was Gabriel Sinclair. I didn't lose focus. I didn't let things spiral out of control. And I sure as hell didn't let a woman, especially one I'm married out of convenience, consume me. But as I sat there, gripping the arm of my chair so tightly my knuckles went white, I knew one thing with certainty. I could keep pretending, keep lying to myself, but the truth was dangerous. And the truth was, Katherine was already under my skin.
My lips were still swollen, my skin still tingled. The scent of him, cologne, power, something darker, still clung to me. Gabriel Sinclair had kissed me like he was claiming me. Like I was his. And like a fool, I had wanted to believe it. I sat in his chair, my fingers tracing the cool surface of his desk, my heartbeat still erratic from what had almost happened. The heavy silence of his office pressed against me, thick with unspoken words and unfinished moments. I should have left. Gone to the mansion. Put space between us before I did something even more reckless. But instead, my gaze fell on the edge of his laptop. Still on. Still unlocked. I hesitated. Gabriel was a fortress, his emotions locked away behind impenetrable walls. He never shared more than necessary, never let me see beyond the cold, calculated businessman. But something was there. Something he wasn't telling me. I knew it. Felt it in the way he had looked at me. The way his fingers had trembled against my skin before he pulled away. Slowly, I reached forward, my pulse hammering as I touched the trackpad. The screen flickered to life. Emails, documents. One stood out. Contractual marriage agreement, Sinclair Holdings. The air in my lungs turned to stone. No. My fingers moved on their own, opening the document. I read. And with every cold, brittle line, I I felt my world start to crack. Clause 4.2, Mrs. Katherine Sinclair shall uphold the public image of a devoted wife for the duration of this agreement. Clause 6.1, the marital contract shall remain in effect until all terms of the business merger are fulfilled. A contract, a goddamn contract. I knew what this marriage was, I agreed to it. But somehow, these words, so devoid of emotion, so ruthlessly calculated, felt like a betrayal. Because buried between the clauses and obligations was something I had refused to admit. I had started to believe it was real. The way he looked at me, the way he touched me. The way, for just a second, I thought he wanted me, not because of some business deal, but because of something deeper. I had been a fool. My pulse pounded as I scrolled further. And then I saw it. Clause 9.5, Mr. Sinclair reserves the right to terminate the agreement should Mrs. Sinclair engage in any behavior that jeopardizes the business arrangement, including but not limited to inappropriate conduct, fraternization with third parties, or failure to adhere to prescribed duties as his spouse. I read it again. Failure to adhere to prescribed duties. Prescribed duties. My stomach turned. This wasn't just about being his wife. This was about control. About making sure I played my role, obedient, proper, untouched by anyone but him. And if I didn't? If I stepped out of line? He could end it. Just like that. A few keystrokes. A legal proceeding, a transaction undone. I gripped the desk, the edges of my vision blurring. I had signed this. The day of the wedding, I barely even looked at the documents they put in front of me. There had been so many marriage certificates, financial agreements, legal formalities. I had been overwhelmed, suffocated by it all, and I had done the one thing I never should have done. I had trusted him. And Gabriel? He had known. He had watched me sign my name, had let me walk into this blind, and never said a word. Heat rose in my chest, anger, shame, something far too close to heartbreak. I had let him touch me, had let him kiss me. And all the while, he had known that to him, I was just a signed deal. The distant murmur of voices in the hallway sent a bolt of ice through my veins. Panic surged in my chest, my hands trembling as I fumbled to close the screen. But before I could fully process what I had just read, the suffocating weight of the truth settled in. My stomach twisted violently. I couldn't stay here. I shot up from the chair, barely aware of my own movements as I rushed out of the office. The air inside felt too thick, too stifling, pressing down on me like a cage. By the time I pushed through the heavy doors and stepped outside, a sharp gust of wind hit my face. I sucked in a breath, deep, desperate, trying to steady the storm inside me. But it didn't help. Because no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't unsee the words that had just shattered everything.
She should have been here. When I left for the meeting, Katherine was still in my office. Flushed lips, skin warm from my touch, eyes dark with something I wasn't ready to name. I had felt her, had wanted her, and when I walked back in, I expected to find her where I left her. But the room was empty. I blinked at the empty space, confusion flickering in my chest. She should have been here. Maybe she was already on her way back to the mansion. Or, my fingers tightened on the doorframe. Maybe she'd left for the car, to take a breath, to escape me for a few minutes. I paced into my office, feeling the silence pressing in. Everything seemed off. The walls felt closer, the air colder. I took a deep breath, but it didn't help. It never did. I moved toward my desk, my phone still vibrating, forgotten in my pocket. But then, I saw it. My laptop. The screen still glowing. The contract still open. A sharp curse left my lips as I clicked the trackpad, the reality of it slamming into me like a blow to the ribs. She saw every clause, every ruthless line. She knew. I stood there frozen, fingers lingering over the keys, my mind racing. I shouldn't have left her alone in here. I should have told her, but I hadn't. I had let her fall into this, let her believe whatever she wanted to believe, because it was easier that way, because I needed her to stay. And now she was gone. I turned, my movements sharp and quick as I stormed out of the office, my pulse hammering in my ears. I drove like a madman, barely seeing the road ahead. My pulse was a relentless drum in my ears, my grip on the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. The second I reached the mansion, I didn't bother killing the engine. I was out of the car and up the stairs before I could think, before I could breathe. And then I saw it. The closet doors stood open, empty. My chest tightened as I stepped inside, scanning the space, as if I'd somehow missed something. But there was nothing to miss. No clothes, no shoes, no trace of her anywhere. A sharp breath left me, the realization clawing at my throat. She wasn't just angry. She wasn't just giving me this silent treatment. She was gone. She had left me. But the sudden tightness in my chest, the feeling that I couldn't breathe, told me that no matter what, I might already be too late. I had to act, but fear was here, and it was consuming me, gripping me in a way I had never felt before. And it was all because of her.
I was home. Back in my old bedroom, back in the house where I grew up. The sheets smelled the same, like fresh linen and a hint of lavender. The window still creaked when I pushed it open. The walls held the same soft beige color, unchanged since my teenage years. Everything was exactly as I left it. And yet, I felt like a stranger. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my arms crossed over my stomach as if I could hold myself together. As if I wasn't already coming apart. I should have been relieved. My father was better. His health had improved, and the weight of those hospital bills, the endless, crushing fear that we'd lose everything, was gone, paid off. Because of him. Gabriel. His name burned through my thoughts like wildfire, and I squeezed my eyes shut, willing him away. Willing away the memory of his hands on me, the heat of his lips, the way his voice had wrapped around my name like a promise. Like a lie. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? He never really trusted me. Never truly let me in. I had been so damn stupid. I turned onto my side, curling in on myself as if that could somehow erase the ache inside me. But it was still there. A dull, relentless pain that had nothing to do with anger. Nothing to do with betrayal. It was grief. Because I didn't just leave Gabriel. I left us. And the worst part? I wasn't sure I wanted to.
The house was smaller than I expected. I stood at the edge of the driveway, my hands clenched at my sides, staring at the modest single-story home that Katherine had run back to. The porch light flickered slightly, casting a dim glow over the front steps. The yard was neat, the hedges trimmed, the flower beds carefully maintained. It was a home, her home, and I had no place in it. But I was here anyway. I took a slow breath, trying to steel myself, trying to suppress the gnawing weight of doubt clawing at my insides. I had faced boardrooms full of ruthless executives, had stared down men who would sell their own blood for power, had signed deals worth more than this entire neighborhood combined. And yet, nothing had ever terrified me more than knocking on this damn door. Because this wasn't business. This wasn't negotiation. This was her. I lifted my hand and knocked. Silence. I knocked again, firmer this time. Still nothing. My jaw clenched. I could see the warm glow of lights through the window, the faint flicker of a television screen. She was here, and she was ignoring me. That should have pissed me off. Should have made me turn around, get in my car, and drive away. But it only made me more determined. So I did something I never did. I waited. Seconds bled into minutes, and then, finally, the door opened. And there she was, Katherine. Her hair was slightly damp, falling in loose waves over her shoulders. She wore a simple tank top and soft pajama pants, but she still looked stunning, more beautiful than I had any right to deserve. Her blue eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, something flickered in them, something that looked a hell of a lot like longing. But then her expression hardened.
What are you doing here?
Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tension beneath it. I swallowed, the words tangling in my throat. We need to talk.
There's nothing to talk about.
Katherine. She moved to close the door. I caught it, stopped her, and for the first time in my life, I did something reckless. I stepped inside. She sucked in a sharp breath as I crossed the threshold, her fingers tightening around the doorknob.
Gabriel, get out.
No. Her eyes flared with anger.
You don't get to do this. You don't get to come into my life, wreck it, and then show up at my parents' house like.
Like what? I cut in, stepping closer.
Like you have a right to be here, like after everything, you still get to demand something from me.
She snapped, her chest rising and falling in rapid succession. My throat tightened. I don't. I exhaled harshly, trying to push down the frustration boiling beneath my skin. I'm not here to demand anything. She let out a bitter laugh.
No? Then what the hell are you doing here?
I should have prepared a speech. Should have walked in here with a perfectly crafted argument. Something that could lay out every reason why I wasn't the man she thought I was. Why what we had wasn't just some business deal to me. But I couldn't seem to think past the overwhelming realization that if I didn't fix this, if I didn't fix us, I was about to lose the one thing that had ever truly mattered. So instead, I told her the truth. I fucked up. That caught her off guard. I saw it in the flicker of hesitation that passed over her face. I took another step forward, my voice lower now, raw. I should have told you everything from the beginning. I should have, hell, I don't know, been different, handled this differently. But you need to know, Katherine, it wasn't just a contract for me. Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to argue, but no words came. Encouraged, I kept going. You knew what our arrangement was in the beginning, but we both know things changed. We changed, and maybe I convinced myself that I didn't have to tell you the rest. Maybe I wanted to believe it didn't matter anymore. But it did, Katherine, and I should have told you, because I swear to you, none of this was ever just about keeping my company. Something in her expression cracked, just for a second, just long enough for me to see the pain I'd caused.
Then why? Why didn't you tell me?
I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling sharply. Because I was afraid, I admitted, afraid of what it would mean, afraid of what you meant. I've spent my entire life controlling everything, making sure I never let anyone get close enough to matter. But you, I shook my head, jaw tightening. You ruined that. You ruined me. And I let it happen because somewhere along the way, I stopped caring about control and started caring about you. Her breath hitched, eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she let out a shaky laugh, one that wasn't quite amused.
You can't just show up here, say things like that, and expect me to.
I love you.
For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The words hung in the air, heavy, impossible. Gabriel Sinclair stood before me, his piercing gaze locked onto mine, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. But none of that mattered. Not the way his fingers flexed at his sides like he was holding himself back. Not the way his voice had cracked, raw and exposed. Because he had just said the one thing I never expected to hear. And I didn't know what to do with it. I had spent the past few days trying to bury the ache in my chest, trying to remind myself that what we had was built on a contract, not love. That I had been foolish to believe there was something real beneath the lies and acting. But now, he was here. Saying those words like they meant something. Like I meant something. I swallowed, my throat tight. Don't say that. His expression darkened.
It's the truth.
I shook my head, stepping back, but he followed, closing the distance between us. You don't get to do this, Gabriel. You don't get to stand here and act like.
Like what?
His voice was rough, filled with something I couldn't quite name. Desperation? Regret?
Like I didn't spend the past 2 days losing my fucking mind without you. Like I didn't realize the second you walked away that I had ruined the best thing that ever happened to me.
My heart pounded, my body warring with my mind. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But the pain was still there, fresh, reminding me of what it felt like to read those clauses in the contract, to feel like nothing more than a business arrangement. I lifted my chin, forcing my voice to stay steady. We built this entire relationship on a lie, Gabriel.
I built it on something I didn't understand.
He corrected, his hands clenching at his sides.
I didn't expect to feel this way about you, Katherine. I didn't expect to need you.
I hated how my stomach clenched at his words. How my traitorous heart still leaped at the thought of being wanted by him. I don't know if I can continue this, I admitted, my voice breaking. I don't know if I can stay in something that started as a contract. Something flickered in his eyes, something sharp, something almost pained. Then, in a swift, determined move, he stepped forward, cupped my face in his hands, and crashed his mouth against mine. I gasped, my body instinctively melting into his as his lips moved against mine with a desperation that stole my breath. His hands were firm on my cheeks, his thumbs brushing away the dampness of my tears. The kiss was fire and fury, an unspoken plea, a silent confession. It was everything I wanted, everything I was afraid of. But when he pulled away, pressing his forehead against mine, his voice came out hoarse, filled with something that almost undid me completely.
Tell me how to fix this. Tell me what to do, and I'll do it.
And for the first time since he walked into my life, Gabriel Sinclair wasn't the one in control. I was.
The salty breeze carried the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore, a rhythmic melody that set the perfect backdrop for this moment. The golden hues of the setting sun bathed everything in warmth, casting long shadows on the sand. This wasn't the first time Katherine and I were getting married, but this time it was real. No contracts, no cold agreements, just love. 6 months had passed since she made the choice to stay. 6 months of proving to her, every single day, that I wasn't the same man who had let her down. 6 months of learning what it meant to love someone without conditions, without fear. And now, we were here, standing on this beach, promising each other forever. We had chosen to do it differently. Something intimate, something that was ours. A handful of close friends and family stood barefoot in the soft sand, the ocean stretching endlessly behind them. There were no extravagant venues, no press, no obligations. Just the two of us, standing under a delicate wooden arch adorned with white roses and soft linen, with the sky and sea as our witnesses. I adjusted the cuff of my sleeve, feeling a rush of something unfamiliar, anticipation, maybe even a little nerves. Not because I had doubts, but because this meant more than anything else ever had. Then the music started, and when I looked up, I lost my breath. Katherine. She moved toward me with effortless grace, the fabric of her dress flowing around her like a whisper of wind. The fitted lace hugged her curves in all the right ways, but it wasn't just the dress that held me captive. It was her. The way her blue eyes found mine instantly, the way her lips curved ever so slightly, the way she radiated something I never thought I deserved. She was my future. When she finally reached me, I couldn't stop myself. I reached for her hands, needing to feel her, to ground myself in this moment. The officiant spoke, but I barely heard him. My world had narrowed to just her. "I love you," I murmured, my voice rough with emotion. Katherine's lips parted, her fingers tightening around mine.
"I love you too."
And just like that, the past didn't matter. The mistakes, the fears, the pain, none of it had a place here. There was only this. Only us. Forever.
2 years. That's how long it had been since I stood barefoot on a secluded beach, vowing to love Gabriel Sinclair for the rest of my life. This time, with no contracts, no hidden clauses. Just love. And in those 2 years, everything had changed. We had built a life, a real one. No more pretending, no more careful distance between us. Gabriel had become the kind of husband I never thought he could be. Thoughtful, fiercely protective, the kind of man who left a kiss on my shoulder every morning before slipping out of bed, who curled around me at night, whispering things he'd never say in the daylight. The ruthless businessman was still there. Sinclair Enterprises had only grown under his leadership, but at home, with me, he had softened in ways I knew only I would ever see. And now, our life together was about to change forever. Because in the middle of the night, as a storm raged outside, my water broke. And Gabriel Sinclair, controlled, calculated, always 3 steps ahead, was losing his mind.
Oh my God. It's happening. We're having the babies. Now.
He muttered, practically carrying me to the car. I groaned as another contraction ripped through me, gripping his forearms so tightly I probably cut off his circulation. No shit, Gabriel. He fumbled with my seatbelt before running around to the driver's side, slamming the door shut. The car roared to life as he shot down the driveway, one hand gripping the wheel, the other reaching for mine. His fingers were tense, but beneath that, I could feel the slightest tremor. Gabriel Sinclair, the man who never faltered, was nervous. I'm fine, I exhaled, rubbing my belly as the contraction passed. They're just eager to meet their dad. He let out a rough breath, glancing at me briefly before refocusing on the road. Twins. A boy and a girl. Gabriel had been insufferable when we found out. He immediately bought books on raising daughters, declared himself an expert within a week, and started talking to my belly every night. He swore our son would be calm and logical like him, while our daughter would run me ragged with her stubborn streak. I told him he had it backwards.
Just hang on, baby. We're almost there.
He said, jaw clenched as he maneuvered through traffic. Another contraction hit, and my entire body tensed. Remind me again why we thought this was a good idea? He turned to me, smirking even as worry flickered in his gray eyes.
Because I'm irresistible, and you can't keep your hands off me?
I let out a breathless laugh, shaking my head. I will kill you, Sinclair. But even through the pain, even with the storm outside and the chaos of the moment, I knew one thing for certain: this was the man I would spend my life with. And in just a few hours, I'd be watching him hold our children for the first time. The thought alone made my heart ache. Gabriel? I whispered.
Yeah, baby.
I squeezed his hand, locking eyes with him as another wave of pain built. I love you. His fingers tightened around mine. And in the middle of the chaos, his lips curved into a soft, almost reverent smile.
I love you more, Katherine.